The Dextadap's concert being denied yet again, CPSA president urging the public to not let their guard down, and the DPM commenting on those two flagships anchored in the Bahamas. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tyler Simonet with your JCN News for this Tuesday, February 8th. Approval for a concert with dancehall artist Dextadaps has been denied twice. This according to Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Michael Darville this morning ahead of Cabinet. He says his team at the ministry received an application from concert promoters, and on January 17th it was denied. They were allowed to submit a second application, and that also was not approved. Asked how likely approval for a third application is, the health minister says this.
It's very unlikely because we're in the middle of a pandemic. Our hospitals are still under tremendous strain. And it is important for us to get our schools open fully. The only source of control that we can execute at the Ministry of Health is large gatherings. And science is clear that large gatherings, irrespective of the circumstances, are high risk for community spread. And so we have to protect the country, and we must execute the tools that we have in our toolbox in order to do so.
He adds that it's always a difficult thing to try to stop commerce. That said, Dr. Darville notes that the country is seeing some good signs as it relates to the COVID-19 climate in country. He says health officials are hopeful that these conditions remain on the same trend. If that happens, he says there will be consideration for relaxing some restrictive measures. He was also asked why it's okay for Bahamians to attend a concert in a hotel and not off a hotel site.
Well, we have definitely spoke to all of the hotel properties, and we have made our position very clear that we do not approve any of these concerts anywhere. And the record would reflect that the Ministry of Health and Wellness made that extremely obvious and clear, and we hold that same position as we speak. The Ministry of Health is responsible for policy. The Ministry of Health is not responsible for enforcement.
As the COVID-19 numbers trend downward here in the country, Consultant Physician Staff Association President Dr. Sabrique Pinder-Butler once again says it's not time for residents to let their guards down. She shares with JCN reporters the highs and lows doctors have faced during the waves of COVID-19 here in the country.
Well, I think at this point, because we've been, in the fight with COVID now for a few years, we've been accustomed, but not necessarily always comfortable with the highs and lows. But we appreciate that, there have been peaks and troughs with numbers of cases of COVID in the country and globally.
In the last 2 years, the Ministry of Health and Wellness has reported more than 32,000 COVID-19 cases and over 700 deaths. Also during this time, daily cases have varied from less than 20 to more than 800. The CSPA chief says that doctors are always a little at ease when the numbers trend downwards.
We know that generally signals better health challenges for our patients, as well as situation in country, and then it allows us to get back to being able to providing more health services for other patients that might have been compromised because of the overwhelming state of COVID in the country.
However, she admits that the healthcare system is facing challenges, including staff shortages, infrastructure, and supplies. The matter with Crystal Cruises is a commercial matter, as Deputy Prime Minister and Minister with responsibility for tourism, investment and aviation Chester Cooper puts it. Crystal Cruise Line's Crystal Serenity and the Crystal Symphony, two Bahamian flagships, were arrested by an order of the Supreme Court here in the Bahamas after diverting here to avoid being detained in the United States. The ships were seized late Friday night. On January 19th, Genting Hong Kong, the parent company of Crystal Cruises, announced that it wouldn't be able to pay its debts, having been sued for $4.6 million for unpaid fuel charges. Crystal Cruises says it's halted its ocean and expedition cruises through April 29th and river cruises through May of this year. Weighing in on the arrest of the cruise ships and the implications that it may have on the tourism product here in the country, the DPM says this.
From a tourism perspective, Crystal Cruises has been a good partner. They had implemented home porting, traveling around the islands of the Bahamas. That product was well received with reasonable degrees of successes in some of the islands. And we wish them well. The numbers that they brought were relatively low in comparison to the 5 million pre-pandemic cruise visitors that we've received. So we don't expect a significant impact in the number of visitors as a result of their departure. However, we want them to do well, and they're having some financial issues clearly at their parent level. They're practically out of business, and it's a commercial matter between them and the people they owe. We wish them well for the future.
DPM Cooper says during 2021, there were less than 20,000 passengers brought to the Bahamas on the Crystal Cruises. In 2021, the cruise line announced that it would home port in the Bahamas and conduct all Bahamas cruises beginning here in New Providence. The cruise line also made investments in several family islands to accommodate its home porting initiative.
Their marketing pitch has always been that they cater to a higher end clientele. They've always said that many of their guests they anticipate will come back to the Bahamas over and over, perhaps as stay-over visitors. Whilst I don't diminish the contribution of Crystal Cruises, I am simply saying that relative to the overall number of guests, the numbers they provided were relatively small. We wish them well. We have many other ships, cruise lines that come to the Bahamas at varying level of income target, and therefore we are absolutely sure that the void that's they are leaving is going to be filled very quickly.
Royal Caribbean International also moved its home port to Nassau last year. DPM Cooper says he's spoken with the Florida Caribbean Cruises Association in Miami recently and says he is confident that the number of calls to Nassau and Freeport will continue.
We've had very good engagement about establishing new calls to Freeport, establishing new tours, strengthening the product so that it can be a more attractive place to call. And we are confident over the course of the next weeks, we'll be able to make some announcements as to what can happen for Grand Bahama.
Former Managing Director of the National Disaster Recovery Authority, Catherine Forbes Smith, has filed a formal lawsuit against the Bahamas government for an alleged breach of contract. The writ, which was filed in the Supreme Court, is seeking some $400,000 in damages. Forbes Smith claims she is owed $238,333.16 in unpaid salary, $65,000 in housing allowance, $32,500 in duty allowance, $6,500 in fuel allowance, and $66,000 in gratuity she says she was entitled to at the end of her contracted tenure. Now, Forbes Smith was hired to the position of director of the DRA under the Minnis administration, and her contract was subsequently terminated under the Davis administration prior to the predetermined expiration date. When asked for his position on the matter, former Prime Minister Hubert Minnis, whose government would have overseen the acquisition of Forbes Smith's contract, had this to say.
Any citizen who feels that they are being unjustly mistreated by the government, or their contract is not being honored, they have a right, a constitutional right, to sue the government. The government also have a constitutional right, if they feel that they are correct, to defend themselves. That's democracy.
Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister, Miles Larota, says he is limited on what he can say on the matter. However, he did tell reporters that since the termination of the former director, provisions have been made to avoid such egregious salary allotments and contractual agreements.
Well, that matter is sub judice. She has filed a writ against the Bahamas government, the DRA. So I don't want to go into specifics. I could say that since the termination of the former managing director of the DRA, the replacement salary has been less than half of that amount.
Education officials met with various education unions a few days ago to determine the way forward for the reopening of face-to-face learning. As you know, students across the country have been using a hybrid form of learning since school reopened this academic year. Education Minister Glenys Hannah Martin says at every local level, each school will review the protocols with a view of facilitating 100% face-to-face learning.
In schools throughout the nation, there are committees which include the teachers, the principals, the ministry officials, etc., Bahamas Public Service Union, looking at the school campus and making determinations to allow for 100%. So you'll find the rollout may not be even. It might be 2 schools here, 3 schools there, and it might vary a bit based on certain factors in each school, but the intention is 100% rollout.
Meantime, more than a dozen schools in the South Central District of the Bahamas, including 5 Long Island schools, welcome their students today as they return to full face-to-face learning for the first time since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. You're watching JCN News. Stay with us.